Okay, well, thank you all for this fourth episode, attending the fourth episode of Brutally Honest. My name's Dr. Manny Straehle, and this is I'm with Adrian Furman. Today we're going to explore this notion of appreciation, generosity, and helping, and the related constructs around that. As you know, on our podcast, we like to make it conversational. We don't know where the conversation will go, but we like to talk about how it relates to the workforce, these concepts, how it relates to our relationships and life in general. And this word that I think I created this morning, the psychology of things. So that's something that's new, and I think we're getting a handle on what we're doing here, but it doesn't really matter as long as we're educating you all and stimulating your thoughts. Maybe not necessarily educating, but stimulating your thoughts is what we like to get out of it. So the typical question I tend to begin with, and poor Adrian, um, in the sense that what is this notion of appreciation? Why does it matter? And a lot of times these constructs can be weaponized, is what I'm learning from these pieces, and they become dark, the Bob Hogan dark
Mm,
traits sort of thing.
mm,
So, and it's interesting, a lot of these psychological concepts, especially the positive ones, can be easily used for weaponization, manipulation, try to getting ahead of somebody else and really damaging the other person, impacting them in a negative way. So I'm just going to open it up there. Thank you, Adrian, for being part of these podcasts. I really enjoy them, and I'm going to let you answer those two or three
oh,
questions.
okay. I've got a few stories related to this. The first is the concept of gratitude and gratitude letters. Because I've been an academic all my life and taught for many years, I get letters out of the blue. So about 3 or 4 times a year, I get an email, and it always begins, "You won't remember me." And I don't remember them. These are students I taught 20, 30 years ago, sometimes 10 years ago. And sometimes they want something from me. They want information about their children going to university. But sometimes they just say, "I was very deeply grateful for your teaching." You light a little flame with somebody, and you don't know what does it really. They will all say different things. I would do a few case studies, or what they liked most of all was being self-disclosive, because professors are not meant to disclose about their personal beliefs and whatever. But they come in quite regular amounts of time. And I've been trying to do this myself. I had a school teacher who taught me, goodness, many, many years ago, and he taught me poetry, and he gave me a fantastic love of poetry. And so when I'm very distressed, I read poetry. I swiftly follow this with a gin and tonic, but I read poetry. And I've tried to send him one of these letters. And then what I discovered, of course, I knew this a long time ago, but I'd forgotten this. The positive psychologists talk about gratitude journals. And so I looked at the literature. And the idea is that at the end of every day, it doesn't have to be at the end, but often, one just keeps a little record of what you're grateful for on that day. Some people would do it in their prayers, but this is a little journal. And what you do is you record 2 or 3 things that have happened to you and that you're grateful for. And there were some studies on this, 20 years ago, good, well-controlled studies, where some people did gratitude letters and others did some other task which didn't involve gratitude, and the third group didn't do anything. And the question was, you could measure people at the beginning and at the end. And it worked. It worked in the sense that the people who wrote the gratitude letters were healthier, in the sense that they were sleeping better and they were happier. And, I understand this. I mean, when you write a gratitude letter, two people benefit, both the giver and the receiver. And I've wanted to tell the school teacher how much he did for me. He would never remember this, but so I feel very grateful, and it's very nice to receive these letters. So I think this is a positive thing to do. It doesn't cost anything. But if you look back at your life and you think, well, a few people have made some important impacts on me. And frequently, when people are dying, they said they wish they had told their father or they wish they had told somebody something, but usually about being very grateful. And so I've decided to try, a monthly gratitude letter to someone who I think has really helped me in all sorts of little ways they didn't even expect to help me. But sometimes it's very difficult to find them. I've spent hours on the web trying to find the addresses of these people that you bumped into. But of course, and that's the important, the lesson is that you should do it more frequently and you should do it more to people on at the moment rather than in time. And I don't think it's manipulative at all. There's no idea of a dark side to gratitude letters unless you assume that there's a normal reciprocity. And if I send you a nice letter, you have to send me a nice letter back. And then we get into a sort of arms war of niceness, which is inauthentic. I don't think it's like that at all. It's simply saying, just to let you know, you had a big impact on my life by doing such and such. I'm very grateful. Thank you. And that will do. So that's a little area of research that I had forgotten about and looked into, which is related to what we're talking about today. The gratitude diary. People have recommended that you keep a diary, a daily diary, and do gratitude letters. It's cheap, it's efficient. I can't see any downside.
Yeah, there's a few thoughts that I wrote down as you were speaking, and I think the diary is very effective. I think a lot of religions talk about your gratefulness towards their whatever their God or whatever that might be, and just having this level of appreciation. And whether you're stating it or whether you're writing it down, there's a lot of literature in the late 90s that came out from Michael White. I think he's from New Zealand, talked about it's the movement of narrative therapy. I don't know where it is at this point, but it's very effective and very powerful. And it was one of those early postmodern therapeutic interventions. And I was really involved with the postmodern therapeutic movement. A lot of my mentors who write a lot now are in many books on postmodern therapy and textbooks on it. I've got to know before they became something. So I'm grateful for that. I think there's a piece of it that you can impact someone very easily just by appreciating them or having a
Yes.
grateful piece to it. I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about, but I never mentioned it to you about today was self-appreciation. I think a lot of that's lost, unless you have a lot of spirituality, and religious movements do a lot of self-appreciation, which I really like. And unless you're with friends, you don't really, or other people who care for you, you forget about yourself a lot of times, and if you're a person who appreciates a lot of things and people in life, you forget about that. And I think that's really
Mm,
important. And as a therapist, we try to find ways to value yourself, that the value, teach people how to value themselves, especially individuals who are going through a lot and are depressed and overwhelmed. Um, and I think the other piece that you mentioned that's really important is this arms war of appreciation. So like I have to reciprocate you and you have to reciprocate
yeah.
me. It just becomes never ending. But there are certain cultures, and like in my family, we tend to, like with my older sister, I tend to reciprocate constantly. But we're not in a war. We're in a loving relationship in that way, So I think that's a better type of, I don't think it's an arms war. I think it's the opposite. It's like a constant peace treaty going on. So I think that's a little different. But like, when it's someone that you don't have a relationship with, it could become an arms war. And I think that's
Yes.
where it becomes
Yes.
weaponized and things like that. I think one of the things I was really looking at is what is appreciation? What does it mean? And I think there's like anything, there's when you weaponize it, it could be disingenuous or it could be
Yes.
genuine. And I think that's a big piece of it. And what does it really mean? I think it's really to look at somebody and say, "Hey, you have done a lot for me, and I want to recognize that, and you've impacted me in a meaningful way." And I think that's really difficult in the workplace to do, because in the workplace you're hired to do something. And if you say, "Hey, I appreciate that you're doing something that you're hired to do," and typically the commodity is the dollar or the money exchange. It's not more than that. But then what's interesting is the employees will want to be recognized and appreciated.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's I mean there's an art to it, but there's also a piece of it that the real art is being genuine about it as
Oh,
and I think that's very difficult to do. It's like, I think the relationships that are mentoring and things like that, that you can really do. You take someone under your wing and they know it. Like I have this somebody I've been working with for the last 11 years, and she just invited me to her wedding, and she's like, "I need to invite you because you've really done a lot in my career and my life, so I really appreciate you." That was very genuine. She just did this recently. And I was like, oh, that's so it's heartfelt, it touches you.
yes.
And when it touches you like that, it's genuine, it's real.
Yes.
But how do you quantify that? That's the hard part.
Mm.
How do you teach that? And it's one of those things that again, it's more, I put it more in that aptitude, ability type thing, so
Yes, it's a trait. Well, I tell you what was related to it is it's sort of gone out of fashion now. Do you remember appreciative inquiry?
yeah, yeah, David Copperfield. Yeah,
Yeah, it was it's sort of turn of the millennium sort of concept.
yeah,
And when I first came across it, I poo-pooed it. It was nonsense. I thought it was, oh God, it's people refusing to be analytical, critical. But I remember one or two occasions sort of trying it out, and it really is quite surprising what impact it
yeah,
has.
yeah.
The idea simply is that it's an inquiry about what things happen and how they might continue. But it's appreciative in the sense that it's looking at what went right and why it went right, not why it went wrong, and how it can do better and so forth. And I think to begin a meeting with that sort of mindset, we've done okay, guys. Let's analyze what we've done well. It reminds me, years and years ago, I was involved in training GPs, doctors, on doctor-patient communication. And we used to video them, real patients with real doctors. And it's very stressful. And, we then used to look at the video afterwards and analyze the behavior. And a colleague and I working together, he's now known for his Pendleton's rules. They call his name is Pendleton, David Pendleton. And it was always when you did this analysis, you started off with what did you think went well? You the patient, you the doctor, what went well with the interview? Let's describe what went well. Now let me tell you what went well. Then and only then do we look at what didn't go so well and what to work
Mhm.
at. But it's establishing the positivity. You're much more able to investigate the negative when you've banked the positive. And I come from a school, the academics, and we lay into each other with vicious condemnation. You never ever do anything. It's never anything good about your presentation or your paper. Let me tell you the seven things which make it trivial or ridiculous or whatever. And that sort of really negative mindset really eats into people. And I remember,
Mhm.
working with my PhD students who have to deal with all this. And you say, well, let's begin with what's good about the paper, what's good about the contribution, what's good about the way you've done things. There's, there's room for improvement. Let's worry about that in a moment. Let's bank and let's record what's good, what's done well, why you succeed up to a point. And I think that's it's not trivial, nor is it disingenuous. I think it's there's two sides of a coin, the good and the bad, the yin and the yang. Let's start off with the positive and sincerely express gratitude, appreciation for what went well, because we can replicate what went well. And I remember that years and years ago, and always tried to bear that in mind. And I think it's part of this gratitude, appreciation that particularly in sort of problem solving issues at work, when you spend how many meetings do you go to solve some damn problem? And they always begin with, this is the problem, who's to blame for the problem, and so forth. And never looking at why certain aspects went well. What are our strengths? What do we do well? And as I said, I used to think I was very cynical at the beginning with all this, and this is all a lot of nonsense. It's a lot of popular nonsense. And having tried it, I've changed my mind. I now do a sort of form of appreciative inquiry, always at the beginning. Bank good stuff. Let's be grateful for what we do done right. Let's celebrate what we've done right. Let's do more of what we've done right. Then we'll look at what's wrong. I don't remember the name of it. Do you remember the original paper or the original?
No, but I think it's a guy named Copywriter because it's interesting. Appreciative inquiry came to me through a close mentor. She was one of the co-founders of it.
Oh,
Sheila McNamee. She was a well-known communications professor at a university in New Hampshire, and really got into the postmodern movement within the communication world. And her and I have had some lovely conversations over the years. And she's like, yeah, that's my colleague. Because I said, you know anything about appreciative inquiry? Because it's like kind of a postmodern
hmm,
framework for psychologists at the time trying to do therapy. So we try to borrow from everything. We began with the philosophers and then we try to do that. So, but it was a really interesting thing. I think what you mentioned though is triggered something in me with my favorite teachers, my favorite mentors. And they would always teach from a framework of it was more neutral than positive or negative, when they gave feedback. It was an interesting, if I think about it, they would say, I think you could improve by doing this, this, and this. It was almost like that. It wasn't like you're writing terribly. Because I had a lot of issues as a graduate student writing because my mom had no education and she spoke broken English, and my dad was educated, but his English was not good. Both of their English was second language, and it was really broken English from the state of New Jersey, New York City kind of world, and it was really broken. So I had to learn how to rewrite things. And this woman named Lois Holtzman, who was she's a well-known Vygotsky expert.
hmm,
She helped me really write, and I remember when she said, "Before we begin, writing's very personal and you're probably going to feel attacked." And I thought that was like genius on her end, because if we begin with that, and I bring that to my plate as like, whenever I give you feedback, you might feel attacked, you might feel this way, and that's a normal reaction. But just remember, I'm here to help you get better and improve. So it was almost like she was cuddling me, or coddling me. And I think we lose that a lot of times. And she was appreciating me. She was seeing beyond my writing ability. She was seeing my cognitive abilities, and she made me feel like I was a genius, from my content, not necessarily the way I was expressing it, the communication piece. And she found a way to like help me express my writing in a better way, like as a writing coach. Because I said my writing's atrocious and I need help, and she's like, I'll help you. And I remember sitting at cafes with her and she giving me feedback. And it's like, why did you write it like this? She was more interested in how I was learning how to write in a certain way. And then she
hmm,
deconstructed it and just
hmm,
opened it up. And I could see how I was making my errors, like not errors in the sense that I wasn't communicating effectively. She's like, your thought is this. You're telling me the thought is this. Why aren't you putting it down on paper like this? And so it was really a loving conversation.
Mm,
So
mm.
how do we try to appreciate someone where they are and try to improve them in a loving way? I mean, if you look at Christianity, Paul said love overcomes everything essentially. So, and so like again, we this concept and notion of love, which is complicated, we don't use it, I think, in a lot of contexts
Yes.
because we want to get ahead, we want to survive, we want to, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for it. But I think it's interesting what you were saying and how we could make, I think, appreciation more loving than less loving. Now I feel like I'm going back to the John Lennon movement.
But of course, as you said in the introduction, some people weaponize gratitude in the completely insincere way. With you,
Mhm.
I think you can hear it quite quickly. You can see it in very manipulative people. You can
Yeah.
see it narcissists don't do it, but psychopaths do.
Hmm.
They use it very, very effectively.
Yeah.
Targeting people who are in some senses sidelined and yearning for compliments of one sort or another. And then they shower them with these and make the person addicted to them. Um, and it's being able to differentiate between sincere appreciation and compliments and insincere ones. And I think it's partly about the frequency. If you often they're not that frequent. They because they're really meant at a particular time and for a particular behavior. So one should be, as it were, you have your uh, 10 compliments a month. I used to do this with a very annoying PhD student who used to email me the whole time. And I said to her, I said, I'll respond to 10 emails a week and only 10. You can use them all up by Monday if you like. It solved the problem greatly. But imagine you've got three or four compliments per person per month, then you've got to think, well, what are the most meaningful things you could say about an individual? What is their favorite compliment? Indeed, I have a what I call a dinner party game, and I ask people that question. I said, imagine I know you well, and imagine I'm being completely honest. What's the nicest thing I could say to you? I could give you a whole range of compliments, but what is the most important? And it is an interesting question because it's a question about values and doubts. So, if you told me that I was tall or something, well, I'm not particularly, but it doesn't do anything for me. There are certain key compliments, key issues that I value fundamentally. And if I believed you genuinely meant it, it would have a huge impact on me. And so it brings up values and insecurities at the same time. Given that I know you well, and given that I'm being honest, what is the very nicest thing I could say about you? I think you get a lot of information from an individual by that, and it's surprising often, in my view, what they say, and disarming people with compliments, with gratitude, when they're not used to it.
Mhm.
It can have a quite profound effect. In some industries, I was on the telephone, so I was doing some telephone banking, and this person was very efficient. And I said, let me just conclude this by saying, you've been extremely helpful and kind, and I don't often get this type of service. And you could see that
Yeah.
she had not been told this often
Mhm.
before.
Mhm.
And the power of what I said, she said, "My goodness, how much I appreciate that." And I thought a very minor gesture on
Mhm.
my part, but my goodness, did it have the effect? And you've got to be careful. As I said, you can't dish them out too much
No,
compliments and
no.
appreciation, but done astutely to the right people, the power of this is enormous, and we underestimate and undervalue it.
Yeah, that's the art piece of it, is the frequency is the art piece. Because if you keep on drawing the same thing, right? it loses its value. So if you just make one piece, it has enormous value. And I think, we're sort of painting appreciation, painting a lot of these things that we give. But we can't paint them all the time because then they'll be redundant. It's like if I tell my son that he's great every single second, he's not going to know anything else. So
Exactly.
I'm probably going to create a narcissist.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I don't think Piaget was try to do that type of experiment, but one of the questions I did ask is like, as you were saying that, and I think it's, about appreciation. I think, your game that you had, George Kelly had this thing called, the father of constructive psychology, personal construct theory, had this thing called repertoire grid.
Mm,
And it's used in IO psychology, but not that often. But and it was used a lot in this therapy. Like you have this, what's the worst thing and what's the best thing of a certain trait, and then you find the middle ground. And he would ask people that question because he wanted them to start having this. He had this thing called fixed role therapy. So he tried to push people to where they wanted to become. So he had these scales. It was a scale of 1 to 10. And what's the trait that's this, and what's the opposite of that trait, essentially, like happy, joy, happy, sad, So where do you want to be? And he tried to push people to those sort of things. So I think that was one thing. And then your game that you played is almost like a Julian Rotter incomplete sentence game.
yes.
So you can ask a lot. Those are real. I always found that to be one of my favorite projective tests. But like the overall question is like, what makes a compliment more effective? And I think that's an interesting question to consider. I think they need to be short, succinct, and not frequent. And they have to get to the heart of things. They have to be really loving. And, what does that really mean? And what does that look like? And I think it's one of those things that it's, again, more of a latent trait in many ways. It's hard. I think it's very difficult to measure. I think there's pieces that you can measure, but I think you're not getting it to directly. That's why I think it's more latent than anything else. So, but I know I have like compliments where people say, like it's one of those things. Hey, that was the other day, like one of my direct reports. I did a psychometric risk assessment, and it goes across. It's very systemic, so it's not just psychometrics. It was for the organization, and I got a compliment from my direct report saying, this is really impressive. And I think the reason why I think that compliment stood out to me was like she's very impressive herself, but she never really has said that to me in the 11 years I've worked with her. I mean, this is really impressive. I know she knows that I'm very good at what I do and things like that, but I never had somebody say that. I never had her say that to me. So it was very infrequent. It was very surprising. And I think she was surprised by it. And I think that's what Steve Jobs did a lot of times. He would create things that were surprisingly impressive to other people. But for him, it was just common things. So and that level of intensity or depth of impressive was what he
Mm,
was able to capture. I always
mm.
thought he was like the best QA tester or quality control, quality assurance tester in the world.
He doesn't
And
have
he
a good
was one. Yeah.
reputation I mean, he's a reputation for being very, very talented, but more abusive than
Oh,
complimentary.
he was very abusive. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So that when you get a compliment from somebody with a reputation like that, if you assume it's honest, it must have enormous power
Hmm.
because it's so unusual.
Well, that's one of the influential kind of rules of influence, in terms of who's it from, right? If it's someone that is what an authority figure, then it has more power to it, more intensity. So, yeah.
I was giving a talk the other day, and I do this a lot of the time, and nearly always people come to you after and say, "Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting." And of course, interesting is it could be interesting for a lot of reasons. And I always say to them, well, if I had to do the talk again, what should I do more of and what should I do less of? You know, in other words, what was good and what was not good, to give you some
Hmm.
very, very clear feedback. And most of them are embarrassed about giving you negative feedback. If it's not a compliment, they don't say it. And that I think is it's the sort of the elephant in the room. Everybody knows that somebody has body odor problems or something, and nobody's ever said it.
Yeah.
And that's a related issue. It's about the courage to say things which are helpful rather than complimentary. I got into the habit of doing this with people. You know, what should I do differently? Uh, what should I do the same and do differently? And it's not asking for compliments. It's asking for clarity of feedback, which is obviously good or bad, but it's a sort of more or less question rather than a good or bad. Because people think it was interesting. Well, of course it was interesting. I'm an interesting person. I would expect it to be interesting, but what was interesting? Was
Hmm.
the funny stories, the slides, the complicated analysis describe what was the interesting bit. Because if you tell me what was good, I can do it again. But you need to be specific in your compliments. You know, you're a very nice person. Well, what does that mean? Are you a very kind person? Well, let me give you an example of your kindness. Let me be more specific in the compliment. You look lovely. Why? Is it your dress? Is it your hair? What is it you've done right to deserve this compliment so that I can do it again? I think they're the sort of the bland, we had a lovely time. Well, why do you, not why do you have, what aspect of made a lovely time? So I think it's the specificity of the compliments that is important because it means you can do something with it. You can repeat the action or the behavior that is thought by others to be positive, but it needs to be described in detail.
I think you're coming to a core issue of compliments and feedback, and that's something that I uncovered when I did the deep dive in feedback research is, and I find this more true for receiving constructive feedback, the things that you can improve upon versus the things that are good, is that a lot of folks don't like to, or it's lost when you give feedback, the level of specificity for someone to improve upon. And like all the behavioralists have really pushed the level of specificity, especially those functional analysis folks. And I think that's really important, but it's really interesting how, in order to survive in life, we've moved to this, thinking fast, thinking slow, thinking fast, or this generalization, heuristics, generalization kind of things, and we lost a lot in that. And I think as society gets faster and faster, even with generative AI, we lose a lot of that. And I think,
Yes.
and I think, generational. I remember my father and the generation before that, they would be more slow, and I feel like they were good at giving compliments, a lot better than my generation. I don't know. I can't speak for the younger generation, but the older generation, I felt like they could give better feedback in general. And they were not afraid either and I think we lost that because I think it was a farm, more of a farm communities that they grew up in. So they had to be more, I think, to survive, they had to give better feedback. Look, that the way you're growing the corn is terrible, the way you're feeding those animals is terrible. And I think they were more direct. And I think in the corporate world, we lost this level of directness because of
Mm,
the climate of legality and things like that, and HR
yes.
practices. And it's become too formal, and it gets more and more formal every single
Yes.
time. You can't say anything anymore.
Well, exactly. I mean, in the workplace, it's all about performance management, performance assessment, annual appraisals, or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And every organization has problems with this, and it never goes away. It's of all the issues that people seem to be most obsessed by is some form of appraisal, where a manager appraises his or her staff, gives them feedback, tells them what's going on. And I've run course after course where I remember on one, it was one for British Airways, that we would watch a real appraisal and you ask the manager beforehand, what did he or she want to say to the staff? What feedback did they want to give, positive and negative? And then we watch them do it, and they didn't do it particularly well. But in the workplace, just the idea of describing a behavior and telling people what was good about it and what it should be done differently to be more successful is at the very essence of all performance appraisals. And you can teach people to do it, but they seem so phobic about it, so terrified. And you think it's just, isn't this part of everyday life? It's communication. Now, in the
Yeah.
workplace, it's become highly politicized, and there's a lot of issues there, a lot of, you can be taken to court and all
Yeah.
sorts. So such that many organizations have given up performance appraisal, which
Yeah.
means, in a sense, you don't get any feedback, good or bad. Or if
Yeah.
you do, it's very selective and very biased. It's
Yeah.
terrible for individuals to
It's
be
very
working
general.
together
Yeah.
without that feedback.
Yeah, I find it to be general. And one of the things I think in the US, a lot of my bosses didn't do the technical skills they didn't know anything about it. They didn't. And one time I actually took one boss, I told her, she took me to HR because she thought I wasn't doing my job well. And it was all in SPSS code. And I looked at the HR person. I was like, I don't understand. This is a surprise meeting for me. I don't understand where she thinks I'm doing things wrong, but she doesn't understand the technical piece. So I'm requesting a technical audit of my work by a technical person. So the HR person agreed to that. This is really early in my career. And the funny thing is, at the end of it, they did the technical audit, and the person who was doing my technical audit had issues with her with the same thing when she reported to her. So she said that my work was exceptional, better than her work, and sent it to every single C-suite person and
Gosh,
everybody. And she got into a lot of issues with that. And she was really pissed off at me. And I had decided to leave at that point because if you can't trust my work. But I think one of the issues that came out of that, and I see it still to this day, is that the feedback piece should be divided by there should be a technical segment, and it should be audited by someone that's more competent
yes,
or equally competent to the technical pieces, not a manager that's trying to direct the work.
yes,
That's a different competency. So you have this incongruency that's been going on for many, many years. I think when my dad began the workforce, he always said that there were people who were both skilled technically and both skilled managerially. And he said it worked out really well that time because they understood the technical pieces and understood the resource, like the project management pieces around the technical pieces, like how long it take, what effort it is. So then you have a better sense of coming back to appreciation. That
yes,
boss has a better sense of what was required for you to work that quickly and solve many problems quickly. And you could see that level of competence a lot better, the technical competence. So, and for me, I don't understand why this never has. I mean, there's efficiency pieces, but in general, like you should do a technical appraisal on someone as a technical job.
yes,
So
yes.
in some
I
ways, I
think
don't know
that
why anyone sued for that. Or maybe they did, but
I think there is a generation issue. Um, I think men more than women of a particular generation find giving of compliments more uncomfortable.
yeah.
I remember once getting people to write them, and so what you did was you must have done this as an exercise. You've got a group that you're working with, and you've got people to write down what they appreciate, what they like about, what they feel good about somebody, as well as what they don't feel good about somebody, and you put them into a hat. So you put out what the things is Manny, I think he does very well this, and he doesn't do very well that. And you'd have these
Mhm.
two piles.
Yeah.
And what I discovered was if you made it anonymous, you got many more better compliments. It was very surprising that, as a man of a particular generation, I was never brought up to give people compliments that I
Yeah.
felt particularly psychological, emotional concept. It wasn't sort of something one learned to do, but I felt it. So if I wrote it down and you didn't know it was from me, I could say it. I think this has probably changed. I think younger people have, can do this a lot better than my generation.
Hmm.
But there are people who this being warm and positive about somebody is not part of what you ever did. Men will do it with humor as well. There'd be a backhanded compliment,
Hmm.
but you would say something and you can pick up what they're really saying. And because of the embarrassment of being loving, positive, or whatever, it's sort of something you don't do. You feel, but you don't do. And I think, one of the grateful things we should have of the younger generation is that there's much less inhibition about saying positive things,
Yeah.
honestly, than
Hmm.
there was previously. The toxic masculinity that I was brought up with. What toxic masculinity does, you know, I don't want compliments. I'm not a wimp. I don't need this sort of
Yeah, yeah,
nonsense,
yeah.
so on. And yet, of course, we know you do. Everyone does.
Yeah, it's interesting the gender differences in communication, and especially when it has to do with helping individuals. I remember we received a lot of training in that, and if you work with men, you have to do sort of men things before you could give a compliment. So, and
That's
you're
right.
doing it during, so you do it during an exercise or a man thing. So you're watching the game, and you could say, "Hey, buddy, the other day when you came over and fixed, my car." That was great. That was fantastic. And then it's, oh, look at the game now, so we could distract with the activity. So, because it's
Yes.
too much for us, so we have to self-regulate in a different way. Whereas, among my three sisters, they would just say, hey, you're doing that really wrong, or oh, I really love how you do that. Give me a hug, and so it's for me, I'm more on the feminine side of my masculinity. So, um, although I think it was the Bender test. I can't remember the
Oh, I
gender.
remember. Yeah, Bender Gestalt, was it? I can't remember.
No,
Yes.
no, not the Bender Gestalt. There's another. I'm getting it wrong. There is a Bender Gestalt, but there's a sex role kind of
Oh, I know who you mean. Bem
Bem.
roll.
Yeah,
Bem
Bem, Bem.
sex
Susan,
roll.
Susan Bem, right?
That's right. So you could
It's
become androgynous or undifferentiated, male,
yeah.
female, androgynous or
I
undifferentiated.
used I used to do that when I taught my human sexuality course. I used to give that to students, and they would really get into it and things like that. But I'm not sure where if her test is still valid or not. But it's like I think it's changed over time, and I don't know if they adjusted it because the old one has some really old
Yes, it's
roles in it.
long gone out of fashion because of its wording.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
don't know if I
it's
don't
been
know.
replaced by better measures, that's all. So if you want to
Yeah,
measure sex role preferences, but of course,
yeah,
with all the current goings on about LGBT and so forth, that this world has become heavily politicized and very sensitive.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's, what do you identify as, and so on and so forth. That is a hot topic which I prefer to
Yeah,
leave.
identity is really difficult these days. Yeah, yeah. So it's very difficult. But it was just an interesting thing in terms of how you help given the gender
Yes,
differences and
yes.
appreciation and generosity. I mean, we didn't really talk about generosity much. We have about 15 minutes left. I don't know if we want to touch upon.
Okay. Well, I mean, one of the things is I'm writing a book on the psychology of Christmas, which is quite interesting, and it's having Christmas just come past, and that is gift giving. And the ideal gift. Now, the worst gift you can possibly do is give money. So I could put $20 notes. I could give you $100, and it doesn't involve any thought and so forth. And sometimes the gifts that are most valued are not by far the most expensive, but it's where either people have put a lot of effort into knowing you or a lot of effort into making the issue. So knowing the person you are, I will spend a lot of time and effort either seeking out something or making something for you. So the gift is in the insight and the time, not the money at all. And as I say to people, I don't want whiskey, I don't want socks, I don't want pens. thank you very much. I don't need any of that anymore. The question is, what can you? The gift is a perception of the sort of person you are. So I am actually showing what I think about you or who I think you are by what I give you. So it's a physical manifestation of my perception of you. And as I said, the money is one of the least important aspects to it because you can see a range of presents. I've given up on presents, but a range of presents. You can see which ones the person really knows me and really has understood me. And in that sense, it's a really important gift. It's one of sensitivity and insight.
Yeah, one of the, every year my older sister makes a calendar since my son has been born, and it has pictures of him and I and the family or things like that. And that to me is probably the best gift I get every year, besides spending time with them. And I think as I get older, that spending time with somebody is probably the best gift, especially someone I like. I
Yes.
mean, I don't know if I would like spending time with someone I dislike, as a gift, but you never know where the
Yes.
conversation goes. So but yeah, and giving to strangers, I would argue that giving to strangers money is like you go to the shopping center here around the holidays and you give like a struggling you look at this family and you give them like a $50 bill, a struggling family. One of the things I do every year is if I go to restaurants, and if I feel like the server is really struggling or things like that, or I have a relationship with that restaurant, I'll double the tip around the holiday time, and or maybe give them like if it's a $40 bill, I give them $100 tip and say happy holidays. And I think in that sense, I think if you're giving to a stranger, the
Yes.
money
Then
is
it has
good.
to be.
But if you're giving it to someone you're related to, money is, I think, the worst. Because it becomes
Yes.
a commodity. It's like, okay,
Yes.
well, you weren't thinking of me. What the heck? You could have bought something with the money you gave me. What happened? You didn't take your time to buy
Ah,
something. So the generosity always has to do with time of giving to somebody. So you're giving yourself up, giving time up for somebody else and giving yourself up. So it's a selfless act. I mean, being helping, appreciating, generosity are all selfless acts, I think. So there's
yes. Money
commonality.
is so cold and it's so comparable in the sense that if I give you $100 and you give me $40, we can see the difference. Whereas other sort of gifts where it shows my insight on the sort of person you are and the amount of work I do to get whatever it is. That is the appreciation that one gets from that type of gift.
Yeah, and I think that's the really big takeaway is that there's a thoughtfulness when you give.
Yes.
And the more thoughtful the gift is, the more you tend to know the person, and you could see that the other person will appreciate it and have a lot of gratitude towards you on that. Typically, that's what happens in terms of the reciprocation. So I guess that's targeted reciprocation. That
Well,
could be a new
I tell you what's
marketing
interesting. In
line.
businesses, I don't know how it works in America, but at Christmas time, there is in many businesses there are rules about gift giving, and the idea is that there's a cap on the amount of money. So it's 25, 30, $40 that we can give each other presents, or we all have to put in something. But there's the cap on this because, and I can remember this as a student years and years ago when somebody gave me something with quite a lot of money. It was about £100 then, which was a lot of money then. And I really appreciated the present, but I couldn't reciprocate in terms of the amount of money. I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And it made me uncomfortable because,
Mhm.
the idea is I buy you a drink, you buy me a drink. It's the
Yeah.
reciprocity. And if you're
Mhm.
given something very expensive, how do you reciprocate?
Yeah.
In terms of gift, well, you can reciprocate in other ways, but the obligations
It's
become
strong.
quite
Yeah.
problematic.
And
And the solution is to cap everything, and that's what businesses do.
yeah, it also becomes quote unquote weaponized again.
Yes.
It can have that potential. And we have that post Enron and post Cleveland Clinic. We have that. The Cleveland Clinic was the pharmacist giving a lot of nice gifts to the pharmacy companies giving a lot of nice gifts, and Cleveland Clinic got caught, and Enron was in the news. So, they did a lot for their employees. Sometimes I go, what was wrong with that? They had like these great parties and things like that. But, there's other ways to appreciate your workers. And like that has to do with the ideal tipping amount to get people or paying someone. If you pay them too much, they're probably going to stop working maybe and things like that. So there's the psychology of income. So that's really interesting too, or tipping and things like that. Because if you tip,
I'll end with one story. It was a story of my wife, and it was about how to control salespeople. So she wasn't in charge of a sales force, but she was helping someone in charge of a sales force. And the problem with these salespeople is they wouldn't do their figures. At the end of the week, they were meant to, do their reports. And of course, salespeople don't like this. It's all very boring and tedious. So the question was, how do you get them to do it? How do you persuade people to do this? And they came up with a brilliant idea. And the idea was that if you get your figures on time for a year, then you and your whole family can go on holiday. The company will pay for you and your whole family to go on holiday to a nice exotic resort. And of course, what you did is you made them do it for a year, so they had to get used to it. And of course, the pressure on the salesperson was from his wife and family because they thought, wow, daddy can take us to, this wonderful place. And of course, it was such a successful technique because and salespeople are often very competitive,
Mhm.
and so you had the competition for doing it right, and it was absolutely brilliant. Particularly the idea of having the family put pressure on the salesperson to do it for their benefit, rather than just give them another car or money. And it was an enormously successful technique of
Yeah.
the nature of a gift to shape behavior.
Interesting around marketing, there's been a few studies, not a lot, that say that if you can get the perception of the spouse, the in terms of purchase
Exactly.
intention, they know it better than the spouse themselves. So if you say, "What's the likelihood your spouse will buy this car?" and they'll tell you, and it's usually pretty accurate, which is always surprising when it comes. There's not that many other good predictors on purchase intention, so I always found that really interesting. But in terms of this episode, it's going to come to an end. But I want to end with a question to you, Adrian. What do you think for our audience in terms of their lives, their relationships, and the workforce? How can they use this gratitude, appreciation,
Mm.
gratefulness, generosity in their world? What do you
I think
think?
practice it. The gratitude journal. I think have a little go at that. I think that's a good thing. And then think of a few people who you feel genuine gratitude to, current as well as past, and work out what you want to say to them. Work out, very carefully what you want to express and do it. And once you've got going on this, it really helps. So the shortlist 5 people, current and past, that you've never said how grateful you are. Work out what you want to say and do it. You'll be surprised at the benefits for you and of course for them.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I think I would follow up with try to do that as genuinely and as loving as
Yes,
possible. Think
yes,
of how other people have done that to you and find ways that how they did it to you. What are the characteristics of in terms of what they did? Was it
yes,
short? Was it long? Was it frequent? Was it real? Did you feel it was real? And also think of the ways when it was not delivered well, and you can learn
yes,
from that as well, because
yes,
there are times when, like, you go to, I mean, in the US, we have timeshare. So,
yes,
they're going to give you a gift because they're going to use or marketing things. You go to Costco here in the United States and they'll feed you for free these samples. And that's all marketing for reciprocation. So it's not because they want to give it to you, it's because they want to have a sale at the end of the day. So, but I think we all have family members that want to manipulate for various reasons, whether it's power, whether it's getting the sale or something from you, there's something. So when it's genuine, there's no give and take. So
Yes.
so try to
Yes.
deliver it that way and do
Yes.
it with your heart, do it genuine, don't give them money. You know, and I think that would be my takeaway for answering my question.
We're on the same page. I totally agree.
Yeah.
So useful and so simple and so
Yeah,
important.
that's such an important thing, and I would emphasize self-appreciation.
Yes. Yes.
Try to appreciate yourself, maybe do it with a gin and tonic or whatever you need to do. But thank you, Adrian,
Thank
for your
you.
insights and what a great conversation again. And thank you all for listening. And we look forward to the next episode. We haven't decided the topic yet, but we hope to see you again. And thank you so much.